Lumiere was more than just a restaurant, it was an institution of exclusivity. Nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills, it wasn't the kind of place you stumbled upon. It was a place you had to know about, a place where reservations were made months in advance, and where the price of a single bottle of wine could exceed a month's rent in most cities. Tonight, the air inside buzzed with quiet sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across polished marble floors, and waiters in crisp uniforms glided between tables, serving guests who barely noticed them. It was the kind of place where even the silence felt expensive, and then the doors swung open. A man walked in. At first glance, he didn't seem like much: worn-out jeans, a plain, slightly wrinkled jacket, and scuffed boots that had clearly seen better days. He moved with quiet confidence, but nothing about him screamed money. He had no entourage, no designer labels, no air of self-importance, which, to Ashley, the restaurant's most senior waitress, meant one thing: he didn't belong. Ashley had spent the last 5 years mastering the art of high-class hospitality. She knew exactly how to cater to the elite, how to flatter them, how to make them feel like royalty. But she also knew how to weed out the ones who didn't fit the image Lumiere prided itself on, and this man, he was a problem. Straightening her uniform, she approached him with a practiced, professional smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good evening," she said, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "Can I help you?" The man returned her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'd like a table, please." His voice was calm, smooth, completely unbothered by her scrutinizing stare. Ashley hesitated, her eyes flicking over him again. No expensive watch. No designer shoes. No visible wealth at all. Her instincts screamed time waster. "Are you sure?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "This is a very exclusive restaurant." That was when the atmosphere shifted. A few nearby guests glanced up from their meals. Conversations quieted just slightly. It was subtle, but the moment was noticed. The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "Yes," he replied simply. "This is the place." Ashley resisted the urge to sigh. The audacity. "Just a moment," she said, already turning on her heel. She marched straight to the host's desk, typing his name into the reservation system with exaggerated flair. "Nothing. No reservation." "Of course," she returned, her smug expression barely concealed. "Well, as I suspected, you don't have a reservation," she announced, her voice just loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "We do have a few tables available, but," she let the sentence hang, as if daring him to admit his mistake and leave. Instead, he just nodded. "I'd still like to dine here." Ashley stared at him. Was he serious? Most people would have taken the hint. Most people would have felt the judgment in her tone and backed off. But this guy? He didn't even seem remotely fazed. Annoyed, she snatched a menu from the podium. "Fine," she muttered. "But I'll have to seat you in a suitable area." Without another word, she turned and walked, not toward the elegant, chandelier-lit center tables, but toward the farthest, most isolated corner of the restaurant. A table near the kitchen doors, the worst table in Lumiere, the place where the clatter of dishes and the voices of staff ruined the illusion of exclusivity. She dropped the menu onto the table with an audible thud. "Here you go. This table should work for you," she said, forcing a sweet tone. "If you need anything, let me know. But only if it's necessary, okay?" For a moment, she waited, expecting him to show some sign of discomfort, maybe glance around awkwardly, maybe hesitate before sitting. But the man, he just smiled. "Thank you," he said smoothly, settling into the chair. "I'm sure this will be an interesting experience." Ashley narrowed her eyes. What was his deal? As she turned to leave, she muttered to another waiter under her breath. "He won't last 5 minutes here. Bet he leaves as soon as he sees the menu." Across the dining room, a few guests continued watching the interaction. An older gentleman swirled the wine in his glass, observing with sharp, knowing eyes. His wife, seated beside him, whispered, "That waitress is awful." He's being polite, but she keeps trying to humiliate him. I know, her husband murmured back. But something tells me she has no idea who she's dealing with. Ashley, meanwhile, had returned to her station at the bar, convinced the man would soon make an embarrassed exit, but he didn't leave. Instead, he calmly opened the menu and began reading, as if he had all the time in the world. Dinner was just beginning. Ashley smirked as she watched from across the room, convinced she had already won. The man, whoever he was, would take one look at the prices, feel completely out of place, and leave before she even had to take his order. After all, Lumiere wasn't just expensive, it was exclusively expensive. A single appetizer cost more than most people's grocery bills for a month. The kind of place where casual dining meant dropping at least $1,000 without blinking. She leaned against the bar, whispering to another server, Matt, who had witnessed the whole thing. I give him 5 minutes, she muttered. Matt hesitated. He had worked with Ashley long enough to know how she operated. But something about this guest felt different. Maybe you should just treat him like a normal customer, he suggested. Ashley rolled her eyes. Please. Did you see his boots? He probably doesn't even have a credit card that works here. But as the minutes passed, something strange happened. The man didn't leave. He didn't fidget or glance around nervously. He didn't even hesitate before flipping through the menu, calmly studying the options. Ashley frowned. What was he playing at? Finally, after nearly 10 minutes of waiting, she sighed dramatically, grabbed her notepad, and strutted toward his table, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. So, she said, putting on her best customer service smile. Have you decided? Or would you like a recommendation? The man looked up at her with a calm, polite expression. I'll have the filet de boeuf Rossini, he said, tapping the menu. Ashley almost laughed out loud. The Rossini, she repeated, just to make sure she had heard correctly. You do know that's a $350 dish, right? She expected hesitation. Maybe a nervous chuckle, a stammered "Oh, never mind, I'll just have a salad." Instead, the man just nodded. Yes. It sounds wonderful. Ashley blinked. Who was this guy? Annoyed that her little game wasn't working, she forced a sweet smile and scribbled down the order. All right then, she said. Just so there are no misunderstandings later, I'd suggest you double-check the prices. We wouldn't want anyone to have an unpleasant surprise when the bill comes. The man met her gaze without missing a beat. I'm certain. His composure irritated her. She had seen actual millionaires get nervous at Lumiere's prices, but this guy? He was either clueless or insanely confident. Either way, she didn't like it. The waiting game begins. Ashley decided she'd teach him a lesson. Instead of promptly taking the order to the kitchen, she took her time. She delivered drinks to another table, stopped to laugh at some joke from a wealthy regular, even disappeared into the back for a few minutes, just to make sure he knew his place. Still, the man waited. Calmly. Patiently, the old gentleman who had been watching earlier leaned toward his wife. She's deliberately making him wait. I know, she whispered back. It's humiliating. After nearly 20 minutes, Ashley finally made her way to the kitchen. Order for table 15, she said casually, handing the ticket to the chef. The head chef, Marco, glanced at it and frowned. You took your time with this one. Ashley shrugged. I was prioritizing our real guests. Marco gave her a sharp look but didn't argue. Within minutes, the dish was sizzling on the grill, the rich aroma of foie gras and prime beef filling the air, but Ashley wasn't done yet. When the dish was finally plated, instead of taking it straight to the man's table, she let it sit under the heat lamp, longer than necessary. She delivered food to other tables first, refilled wine glasses. Flirted briefly with a regular who always tipped generously. By the time she finally picked up the man's plate and made her way over, at least 10 more minutes had passed. She set the dish down with a thud. Here's your order, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I hope it meets your expectations. If she expected him to be angry, she was disappointed. The man simply nodded, glancing at the dish with interest. It looks excellent, he said. Thank you. Ashley's eye twitched. Nothing was working, she needed one last push. Leaning in slightly, lowering her voice just enough for only him to hear, she whispered, "Are you sure? It's a very sophisticated dish. It might be difficult for someone who's not used to fine dining." The man's expression didn't change. "I'm sure," he replied. "Thank you for your concern." Ashley gritted her teeth and walked away. An audience forms. By now, the entire restaurant had noticed what was happening. Waiters exchanged glances, guests whispered to one another, and the older gentleman, who had been quietly observing the whole ordeal, set down his wine glass and murmured, "This has gone too far." Across the room, a well-dressed couple shook their heads. "She's trying to embarrass him. And he's handling it better than most people would." At the bar, Matt sighed. "Ashley, you should really let this go." Ashley scoffed. "Trust me. He's just pretending to be calm. He'll lose it soon." But deep down, a small, nagging doubt crept in, because no matter what she did, he wasn't breaking. Ashley was losing control of the situation, and she knew it wasn't just that the man at table 15 was staying calm, it was that everyone was watching now. She could feel their eyes on her every move, the subtle whispers, the judgmental glances. And worst of all, he still wasn't reacting. She had done everything. She seated him at the worst table, she delayed his order, she made sure his food sat under the heat lamp just long enough to ruin the perfect temperature, and yet, he was still sitting there, eating his meal like he was at some cozy little diner, completely unbothered. Ashley clenched her jaw as she watched from the bar, gripping her tray a little too tightly. Who the hell was this guy? Across the restaurant, the older gentleman, the one who had been watching since the beginning, leaned toward his wife. "She's embarrassed herself more than she's embarrassed him. She doesn't realize that yet," his wife murmured back. Meanwhile, the mystery man at table 15 took his time with his meal. He ate with quiet appreciation, savoring every bite. When he finished, he set down his fork, took a sip of water, and waited. That's when Ashley saw her last chance. The bill. She grabbed the check, took a deep breath, and walked toward his table with the same smug confidence she had started the night with. "Well," she said, placing the bill down a little too hard. "I hope everything was to your liking." For the first time, a flicker of amusement crossed his face. "It was excellent. Thank you." Ashley forced a smile, barely resisting the urge to roll her eyes. "Perfect. Your total is $1,322. And just so you're aware, we have a strict 20% minimum gratuity policy." She tilted her head slightly, waiting for the moment of realization, that split second where his face would drop, where he'd stammer out an excuse or scramble for his wallet in panic. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a black card, and placed it gently on top of the bill. Ashley's breath caught in her throat. A Centurion card, not just any credit card, one of the most exclusive in the world. A card reserved for only the ultra-wealthy. The kind of card that didn't have a limit. Ashley stared at it, she could feel the heat rising in her face, the weight of every single pair of eyes in the restaurant burning into her skin. The murmurs grew louder. She slowly picked up the bill and card, spinning around quickly so no one could see how shaken she was. She barely made it to the register before Matt caught up with her. "Ashley," he said under his breath. "What if he's—" "Shut up," she snapped, running the payment through. The receipt printed out instantly, paid. No hesitation. No declined transaction. Just paid. Ashley turned back toward the table, her hands gripping the receipt so tightly that the paper crumpled slightly. What the hell was going on? She forced herself to walk back over, setting the receipt down carefully. "Here you go, sir," she said, her voice noticeably less confident. The man took it, glanced at the total, and then did something that sent a ripple through the entire restaurant. He pulled out a pen and he wrote something down. Ashley's breath caught in her throat as she watched him scribble the tip amount. Then he slid the receipt toward her, smiling politely. Ashley's eyes dropped to the paper, and when she saw the number, her knees nearly buckled. $10,000. The room fell silent, for the first time all Night, Ashley was completely speechless as the man stood up, sliding his jacket back on. He nodded toward her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for the service tonight," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I appreciate it." Then, he turned to leave. Ashley could barely process what was happening. She could feel the stares, the quiet judgment of the entire restaurant pressing down on her like a weight. She turned to Matt, her hands shaking. "Who the hell is he?" Matt didn't answer because someone else already had. A voice cut through the quiet hum of whispers, the restaurant manager, and his words made Ashley's blood turn ice cold. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize for the poor treatment you've received tonight." Ashley froze, her stomach twisted into knots. Mr. Reeves, slowly, she turned her head and saw the manager rushing toward the exit, his face pale and filled with regret. The man, the one she had been humiliating all night, Keanu Reeves, turned slightly, giving a small, polite nod. "No worries," he said simply, and then, he walked out the door. Silence, pure, horrified silence. Ashley felt her heart slam against her ribcage as realization crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had just humiliated one of the most beloved actors in the world. A billionaire. A Hollywood icon. One of the restaurant's owners. Her body went numb. "Oh, my God," Matt exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. "Ashley, you just insulted Keanu Reeves." Ashley couldn't breathe. The whispers turned into full-on conversations, the entire restaurant now buzzing with energy. "Did you hear what just happened? That was Keanu Reeves. And she treated him like garbage. Did she seriously just do that?" Ashley staggered backward, her face white as a sheet. The manager turned toward her slowly, his jaw tight. "Ashley," he said, his voice dangerously low. "My office. Now." Ashley couldn't move. Her world had just imploded, and outside, walking down the neon-lit streets of Beverly Hills, Keanu Reeves simply smiled to himself, because he had known exactly what he was doing the entire time, and he knew, the real lesson was only just beginning. Ashley sat frozen in the manager's office, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The silence was suffocating. Across from her, Daniel, the restaurant's general manager, was pacing back and forth, rubbing his temples as if he was trying to physically push back a migraine. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he finally asked, his voice deathly calm. Ashley swallowed, her throat dry. She had worked under Daniel for years, and never, not once, had she seen him this angry. I didn't know who he was," she stammered. Daniel stopped pacing and turned to her so quickly that she flinched. "That's the whole damn point," he snapped. "You didn't know. And yet, you decided to humiliate a paying customer just because you thought he didn't belong." Ashley opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. What could she even say? She had no defense, because deep down, she knew he was right. Daniel sighed, running a hand down his face before shaking his head. "Do you understand how much damage this could do to us?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Keanu Reeves isn't just some random rich guy. He's one of the most beloved celebrities in the world. He's humble, generous, and, oh yeah, one of the damn investors in this restaurant." Ashley's stomach dropped. She had already figured out that she had screwed up beyond belief, but he was an owner. This wasn't just bad. This was career-ending. I didn't mean, it doesn't matter what you meant, Ashley." Daniel cut her off. "You think this won't get out? You think the people in that dining room aren't going to tell everyone they know about how one of our waitresses treated Keanu Reeves like dirt?" Ashley sat there, her mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. She had built her reputation on being one of the best servers at Lumiere. She had power here, but now, she was just the waitress who had insulted a Hollywood legend. Daniel exhaled sharply and leaned against his desk. "Keanu didn't make a scene. He could have embarrassed you in front of everyone. Hell, he could have fired you on the spot. But he didn't." Ashley looked up hesitantly. "So, maybe that doesn't mean you're off the hook," Daniel interrupted, his eyes narrowing. It means he's giving me the chance to handle this. And you better believe I'm going to. Ashley's heart pounded. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small. Daniel studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. Go home, Ashley. She blinked. Wait, you're done for the night. Go home. I'll call you tomorrow once I decide if you even have a job left to come back to. Ashley felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under her. She had never been sent home before. Not in all her years of working at Lumiere, and now, she was being dismissed like an afterthought. For a moment, she thought about fighting it. About arguing, but one look at Daniel's face told her there was no point. She had lost. Slowly, she stood up, swallowing her pride as she turned toward the door. Just before she stepped out, Daniel's voice stopped her in her tracks. And Ashley? She turned slightly, but didn't meet his eyes. If I were you, I'd start thinking about what kind of person I really want to be. She left without another word. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves stepped out onto the neon-lit streets of Beverly Hills, hands tucked casually into his pockets as he strolled away from Lumiere. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the faint sounds of distant traffic and laughter from nearby bars. He had felt the weight of the entire restaurant watching him as he left. The whispers. The stunned expressions that he knew exactly what they were thinking. Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he call her out? The truth was, he didn't need to. He had been in the industry long enough to know that people like Ashley always expose themselves in the end, and they always learned their lesson the hard way. He glanced down at the receipt still in his hand, the $10,000 tip staring back at him. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about sending a message. People revealed their true selves when they thought no one important was watching. Ashley had made her choice. Now, she would have to live with it. With a small, amused smile, Keanu tucked the receipt into his pocket and disappeared into the city. Tomorrow, Lumiere would still be standing. The world would move on, but for one particular waitress, things would never be the same. The next day, Lumiere felt different. The restaurant was still as luxurious as ever, crystal chandeliers sparkling, hushed conversations drifting through the air, servers gliding between tables with practiced ease. But beneath the polished surface, there was tension. Everyone had heard what had happened the night before. Ashley's mistreatment of Keanu Reeves, one of the restaurant's owners, had spread like wildfire. Staff whispered in the back. Regular customers exchanged glances. Even Daniel, the general manager, looked exhausted, as if he had spent the entire night dealing with damage control. And Ashley wasn't there. Her name had been quietly removed from the schedule.no announcement. No farewell. Just, gone. Matt, one of the other servers, sighed as he finished resetting a table. I knew she was pushing her luck, he muttered to a coworker. But I didn't think it would end like this. She did it to herself, someone else whispered back. Meanwhile, in the private office at the back of the restaurant, Keanu Reeves sat across from Daniel, sipping a cup of coffee as they discussed the night before. I appreciate how you handled it, Keanu said simply. Daniel let out a tired laugh. You mean how I nearly had a heart attack when I realized what was happening? Keanu chuckled, setting his cup down. I wasn't expecting special treatment. I just wanted a meal. Daniel shook his head. And instead, you got an ego-driven power trip from someone who thought she could judge people based on their clothes. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I should have caught onto her attitude sooner. Keanu leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. The problem isn't just Ashley. It's a mindset. People assume wealth and value are tied to appearance. It happens everywhere. Daniel nodded, exhaling. Yeah, but not in my restaurant. Not anymore. There was a knock at the door. One of the assistant managers poked their head in. Sir, there's someone here asking to see you both. Daniel frowned. Who? The door opened wider, and Ashley stepped inside. She looked nothing like the confident, arrogant waitress from the night before. Her posture was stiff, her face pale. There were dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept all night. She took a slow breath before speaking. I know I probably shouldn't be here, she started, her voice quieter than usual. But I needed to say something. Daniel crossed his arms, skeptical. Go on. Ashley swallowed. I messed up. I know that. She turned to Keanu, her expression tense but sincere. I judged you. I treated you like garbage because I assumed you didn't belong here. And now I realize how ugly that was. Keanu didn't say anything. He simply watched her, letting her talk. Ashley shifted on her feet, her voice growing thick with emotion. This job meant everything to me. But I let my ego get in the way. I thought that because I worked here, I had some kind of power. And I used it to make people feel small. She clenched her jaw. But last night, I was the one who felt small. And I deserved it. The room was silent. For the first time, Ashley wasn't making excuses, she wasn't blaming the customer. She wasn't pretending to be the victim, she was owning it. Daniel glanced at Keanu, waiting for his response. Keanu studied Ashley for a long moment before finally speaking. Why are you really here? He asked. His voice wasn't harsh, just calm, steady. Ashley exhaled. Because I don't want to be that person anymore. She looked down. And because I don't know how to fix it. Another silence stretched between them, then Keanu stood up. People make mistakes, he said simply. What matters is what they do next. Ashley hesitated. Does that mean? Keanu smiled faintly. It means I hope you take what you learned and use it to be better. Whether that's here or somewhere else is up to Daniel. All eyes turned to the manager. Daniel sighed, tapping his fingers against the desk. Finally, he spoke. Ashley, I'm not firing you. But you're starting over, different section, different attitude. No more superiority complex. If you step out of line again, you're gone. Understood? Ashley blinked, stunned. You're giving me a second chance. Keanu's giving you a second chance, Daniel corrected. Don't waste it. Ashley turned back to Keanu, swallowing hard. Thank you. Keanu nodded. Make it count. Ashley left the office, still looking shaken, but for the first time in years, humble. Daniel let out a deep breath, shaking his head. You're a lot kinder than I would have been. Keanu smiled slightly. It's not about being kind. It's about making sure people learn. He glanced out into the restaurant, where the customers enjoyed their meals, completely unaware of the small but important change that had just taken place behind the scenes. A place like this isn't about who deserves to be here. It's about making people feel welcome. That's the real luxury. Daniel smirked. You ever think about running this place full-time? Keanu laughed. I think I'll stick to movies. But I'll be back. He grabbed his jacket and made his way toward the exit, leaving behind a restaurant that, just maybe, had changed for the better. And as he stepped out into the night, he thought about everything that had happened, the judgment. The lesson. The shift point. One simple dinner had changed everything, and Keanu Reeves walked away knowing he had made an impact, without ever needing to raise his voice.